Here's a puzzle. Half of every generation that ever lived dealt with the same thing every month for roughly 40 years of their lives. It shaped daily routines, work, travel, and clothing for thousands of years across every continent. And it is almost completely missing from the historical record, not because it did not matter, because nobody wrote it down. History was mostly written by men, and this was the one subject they either would not touch or got spectacularly wrong when they did. So today we are doing the review history skipped. What did women actually use before pads existed? What did people believe was happening from Egypt to Rome to China to the Aztec world? And how did half the planet manage this monthly in a world with no plumbing? The answers involve moss, papyrus, sea sponges, agave fibers, medieval superstition, and two ancient male authors whose theories were so wrong they stayed wrong for over 1,000 years. Stay for them. They earned it. First, the practical question everyone quietly wonders about. What did women actually use? The honest answer from historians is we know less than you would expect. Precisely because nobody documented it, but the evidence we do have points to a very human toolkit, and it changes depending on where you stand on the map. In Egypt, medical texts as old as the Ebers Papyrus from around 1550 BCE reference gynecological conditions, and the leading theory is that women used softened papyrus and rolls of soft linen, the same material used for everything from clothing to mummies. And here's the twist. In Egypt, menstruation was not treated as shameful. It was tied to fertility, to the goddess Isis, to the flooding cycle of the Nile itself. Women were not isolated. Life continued as normal. Compare that to Greece, where the philosophy was dazzling and the biology was frankly unhinged. Aristotle wrote, seriously, that menstrual blood was failed semen. His theory was that women's bodies tried to produce semen just like men, but because women were colder and weaker, the process failed and blood came out instead. This was not a fringe opinion. This was mainstream Greek science for centuries, and it was used as proof of female biological inferiority. Meanwhile, actual Greek women were using wool, small wool pads or plugs functioning as early tampons and fabric belts to hold material in place. Practical women, impractical philosophers. Rome gave us aqueducts, concrete, and Pliny the Elder, who deserves his own paragraph. Now for the beliefs, and this is where history goes off the rails. Pliny wrote, in a serious scientific encyclopedia, that contact with menstrual blood could sour wine, kill crops, dull mirrors, blunt knives, drive dogs mad, blacken bronze, and even repel hailstorms and whirlwinds. That last one is almost impressive. None of that is true, not one word. But Pliny was famous. His encyclopedia was copied for centuries, and his nonsense became the educated European position for over 1,000 years. While Roman men were writing that women could ruin a harvest by walking past it, Roman women were quietly using soft cloth, wool, and sea sponges sourced easily from the Mediterranean. And access to good material came down to class. Wealthy Roman women had fine linen and household help to wash and prepare it. Poor women, and most women were poor, made do with rough cloth and rags. That gap between rich and poor solutions runs through nearly every civilization in this story. Religions built entire rule systems around the cycle. In ancient Jewish law, a menstruating woman was considered ritually impure, or niddah, restricted from touch and certain objects until ritual immersion in a mikveh. Hindu text, the laws of Manu, warned that a man who had contact with a menstruating woman would lose his wisdom, strength, and eyesight. Persuasive, if not exactly medical. Zoroastrian texts went further still, isolating menstruating women with limited food and no contact with fire, water, or earth, the sacred elements of that faith. Separate spaces existed in many other cultures too. Menstrual huts and moon lodges, where women were sent monthly, and here history gets genuinely complicated. In some traditions, this was exile, dressed up as purity. In others, women in the moon lodge were considered to be at their most spiritually powerful and returned from it with elevated status. Not a punishment, a monthly retreat with rituals, particular foods, and no chores. Same practice, opposite meaning, depending entirely on who was telling the story. Meanwhile, the actual medical understanding across Europe was upside down. For centuries, doctors believed menstruation was the body purging excess or corrupted blood, a necessary cleansing, which led to a spectacular irony. Physicians treated all kinds of unrelated illnesses in both women and men by deliberately bleeding patients, recreating with knives and leeches the very process they thought needed to happen naturally. If a period was late, doctors prescribed herbs called emmenagogues, parsley, pennyroyal, tansy. Medieval herbalists were not entirely making it up. Some of these plants really do contain compounds that stimulate the body. Medieval herbalists were not entirely making it up. China took a strikingly different path. Traditional Chinese medicine treated the female body as its own complete system, not a broken version of the male one. The timing, color, and volume of menstrual blood were diagnostic tools, tracked in texts going back to the Han Dynasty. Chinese women used cloth pads, silk for the wealthy, cotton for everyone else, held in place with woven belts, an early ancestor of the modern reusable pad. And there was an entire tradition of herbal formulas designed to regulate the cycle and ease cramping, refined and passed down through generations of physicians. Across the ocean, the record gets frustratingly thin, mostly because colonization erased so much of it. What we do know is that the Aztec world had an intensely cyclical worldview, agriculture, warfare, and calendars, all tied to cycles, and the female body was part of that same cosmology. Aztec women appear to have used fibers from the maguey plant, the same plant behind agave for absorbent material. And then there is pain. Menstrual cramping was real then as now, and for most of history, the pharmacy offered nothing but plants. Greeks used warm wine compresses. Romans prescribed exercise. Chinese medicine had elaborate herbal formulas. Medieval Europeans had their emmenagogues. Chamomile, ginger, cinnamon, and fennel show up again and again across unrelated cultures. And that is not a coincidence. It is generations of women testing things and passing down what actually worked. The first time a woman could simply walk into a shop and buy an effective painkiller, for this was astonishingly recent within the last century and a half. So what changed? Industrialization, war, and finally, someone asking the right question. The first commercially produced disposable pad appeared in 1888, a product from Johnson & Johnson called Lister's Towels. It flopped. Victorian women were too embarrassed to ask a male pharmacist for it by name, so the product quietly failed. During the First World War, nurses noticed that a new wood pulp bandage material absorbed far better than cloth, and after the war, that material became the basis for the next generation of disposable pads. But the real turning point came in 1921 when Kotex ran an advertising campaign that reframed the product as basic hygiene rather than something shameful, and mass adoption finally began. Tampons with applicators followed in the 1930s. Here's a fact that lands hard. The disposable pad, one of the most life-changing inventions for half of humanity, arrived after the airplane, after the telephone, and after the machine gun. Humanity flew before it solved this, so here's the fact we promised, made simple. Every woman in history, every queen, every peasant, every priestess, every philosopher's wife, and every philosopher's mother on every continent managed this monthly for decades with cloth, wool, papyrus, sponges, and ingenuity, while surrounded by wildly different beliefs about what was actually happening to her body. And almost none of it made it into a single history book. Time for the verdict. Periods through history, reviewed honestly. The equipment, moss, wool, papyrus, sponges, and improvisation on every continent. The science, confidently wrong in at least 3 different languages for over 1,000 years. The public conversation, non-existent until embarrassingly recently. The respect. Pliny said you could kill crops by walking past them, and a Hindu legal text said, a man would lose his eyesight for touching you. Final rating, 1 star, and an overdue apology from the historical record. Although credit where due, the cloth and ingenuity system, invented independently by anonymous women on every continent and passed down mother to daughter for millennia, worked. No thanks to a single doctor, author, or institution. It was the quietest, longest-running engineering project in human history, and it happened everywhere at once. And next time on the channel. We talk about how the past looked. Nobody talks about how it smelled. Spoiler, it smelled like a tannery next to a graveyard, next to a man who last bathed under a different king. Bring a peg for your nose. See you then.